morning or good afternoon, depending on where
Good
you are.
morning.
Today is June 26, 2022. Um, let's start by setting our intentions, making aspirations by saying the four measurables prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings
Be never
be
separated
separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. Um, so we'll meditate at first here, and then Victoria is going to start a discussion. We're not going to go through much of a review today. So if you're new, which I don't know, probably not too many new people today. If you go onto the website, the YouTube channel, um, why do I always forget the website? Nick, just post that if you can under the chats. I always forget where to find it. But the first classes of this year, the first couple of classes from this year have very detailed review. Meditation with Michael Imperioli, YouTube. So the first ones right after January 1st, 2022 have really good review of the basic technique, but I'm sure most of you know it. So we can start with the 9 purifying breaths. You start with the right hand. And you make the Vajra fist with the thumb going to the base of the ring finger, then closing. And with the index finger, we close the left nostril and breathe in the right to the right channel. We're working with the 3 subtle body channels. Central is blue. Depending on, usually with men, the white is on the right, the red is on the left. But you define how you want to do that. And just do the opposite. Now both nostrils with the central channel. On the final out breath, imagine the breath going out the crown chakra, the crown of your head, merging your consciousness with space, and take that right into the meditation. Stay with the practice, even if I talk. But I'm assuming most of you familiar with where to focus the breath, the space between the nostrils and upper lip, the technique of returning to the breath, back to the breath, focusing your attention there. using the visualization technique, dealing with the thoughts, right? As the thoughts arise in the mind, we become aware of the fact that we're thinking, and you can use that technique of imagining them like clouds emerging from the sky, the limitless clarity of the sky, emerging and then dissolving back into them, thoughts dissolving back into the mind. And the third technique we've discussed in this class, mind looking at mind. And an important thing to remember is we're not fabricating or elaborating on anything really. What we're doing is just kind of sinking into what's already there. That calmness, that clarity, that limitless spaciousness, that quality is the nature of our mind, and it's there. We're just going beyond the distractions of the conceptual mind and thought and, habitual thought, habitual patterns. We're going we're letting that go, sinking into what's already there, sinking into the baseline, if you will. We're not inventing this space. We're not creating it. We're not fabricating it. Not altering anything, really. A great image is you get a glass and you scoop up a glass full of water from a muddy river. And at first, when you settle that glass down, the water is cloudy or muddy. And after a while, the sediment will settle in the bottom of the glass, and the rest of the glass of water becomes clear. It's really kind of what we're doing here. What clears it is the settling. What clears that water of its impurities and sediment, the things that make it cloudy, is the settling of it, the stillness of it. We're doing that with body, speech, and mind. Victoria is going to take over from you, so go ahead.
Take over. Anyway, last time we talked about the structure of ego. And the structure of ego is like a high-rise building. It's many different identities that are created by us. Concepts strung together into a variety of groups which are our identities. Such as, for example, a single one of us, each one of us will have a huge multiplicity of identities. Who I am as a father, who I am as a son, who I am as a civic person, who I am as a, someone who exercises, who I am as someone professionally, who I am as this. And all these things are strung together to create some kind of a more encompassing identity that we call the self. If we really examine what the self is, it is a complex structure of many of these identities. Many of these identities also express, all of these identities express different views regarding ourselves, judgments. When I say views, I mean concepts and judgments regarding ourselves, others, and the world. So identities are not a mere perceptual experience. Identities are such as, for example, eating ice cream or smelling a flower or just experiencing a tree or something, which arises as a matter of perceptual experience. These kinds of identities, the ego structures, they take that experience of raw perception and then they add things to it. So, for example, if I see a man, the ego will add things like, this man is my enemy, or this man is my friend and I need him, this man is my employee. A lot of times, the ego will layer onto the perceptual experience many of these judgments and concepts that create these complex things that we perceive through our afflictive emotions. For example, a concept of an enemy is a multi-layered system of perception, label, judgments, and then we experience that already. Even though we create it, we create that concept of an enemy, we create that complexity, that structure we call an enemy. At the same time, our experience of it reflecting back to us is a very painful experience because that complex, that compound internally already gives us back something that we experience as pain, as suffering. It's a part of that complex that we've created. The problem is that the ego would like us to believe that something out there, the enemy, is something that is there self-standing on its own, because the ego, of course, wants to be validated. It would never want to say to itself, hey, I've created this, I've added this onto that person. I added, he's sharp, he's bad, he's this, he's hideous, he's a monster, and all these kinds of things. Those are the things that we add on to the mere perception of a person. And that is something that we do it from our side. And the pain arises together with that perception. But of course, in terms of ego, the ego would never want to say that out of this empty experience, just, perception of a man, that we've created this complex that now arises as something that we experience as something very painful. So we discuss this in context of the Four Noble Truths, and namely the first two truths, suffering and the causes of suffering. This is what suffering is, creating this compound that's based, the construct that is based on our ego. And this is the causes of suffering, is that we not understanding that we've created and layered this cake, and now we're eating it, so we're suffering, you know. The cause of suffering is hidden because we never want to say to ourselves that we create the suffering, you know. And the suffering is created by believing in the self, ourself, that the self is real, such as, for example, this dualistic notion that here I am and here's my enemy, and my enemy is something that is horrendous in itself. So uh, this involves, you know, believing in the self and then the other in a particular way that we have created. And that creation happens through concepts, opinions, and judgments, and afflictions, fears, projections, etc. All those things that, of course, are a part of something that our awareness can create and construct under, you know, under the sway of ignorance. So the enemy arises, we perceive and label that experience, that complex. But remember, underneath that enemy, you will find all of these layered pieces of that cake of concepts and afflictions, because there is something in us that wishes underneath to perceive that person as such. It isn't anything that is in itself. It is something that we produce and we create, and then we experience self-reflexively. This conceptual state of affliction and experience of, especially of that negative nature, is something that is completely void of bodhicitta. It is void of our nature. And remember, like Michael said, you know, what we're doing in meditation is we're going down to the baseline. The baseline is, let's say, if we compare it to water, whatever happens on the surface of the ocean, whether it's a hurricane sinking ships, killing people, you know, destroying this and this, or if it's just like little waves, we're surfing and, you know, pleasure on the beach, or little bubbles, the nature of the water does not get affected by any of these events that are produced by our ego complex, by our awareness used in that way to pound the water, to create the waves, to create the bubbles. The nature of the water always remains the same. And Rinpoche frequently refers to the ego as water that is frozen, like a little ice block that's floating on top of the ocean, believing that it's a self-standing thing. But ultimately, given other conditions such as wisdom, that ice block melts and reverts back into its original state. So the original state never alters. What alters are these secondary kinds of conditions. And of course, depending on whether we have wisdom or not, we understand all water to be of the same nature. So what happens in that ice block or in the hurricane level on the surface of the ocean is that our bodhicitta is suppressed by rigid constructs of our ego, where we create enemies, where we create painful things, where we create all these kinds of glass events against which we always have to rub. The ego filters bodhicitta down and suppresses our nature so that we don't become aware of our nature. Because what is our nature? And that has to do with the view. And I would like to read a quote from Garchen Rinpoche regarding our nature and the view. This passage particularly pertains to the view. So the view is essentially the view of open dimension of being. The open dimension of being, that refers to our nature. Or emptiness. Open dimension of being or emptiness. But it is not only emptiness, our being. Meditation on the view alone is not sufficient to encompass the totality of reality. Reality or our nature, those are synonymous things. Because there's also the energy of the open dimension of being and emptiness. And that energy itself is compassion. So meditation properly practiced is a combination of the view of emptiness and the experience of the energy of that all-embracing expanse of space and awareness. That energy being compassion. Proper meditation, therefore, is emptiness and compassion in indissoluble union. Without bodhicitta, whatever practice you engage in is grounded in ego-grasping, self-cherishing, and is a fabrication of the ego mind. That is why bodhicitta is absolutely indispensable, and that is why meditation is not just awareness or knowledge of that cognizes emptiness, but is also passionately loving and compassionate toward all sentient beings. And often Rinpoche refers to this energy of awareness of the ultimate state of the self and phenomena, which is referred to as emptiness or the open dimension. I like open dimension better than emptiness. It's because out of open dimension, everything creative and amazing arises. It's out of that open space where nothing yet exists, but everything is possible, is where wisdom mind arises. Rinpoche often refers to this, the two-dimensionality. You can't really say two, they're union of emptiness and compassion. The union of emptiness and compassion he likens very often to the sun and its rays. You cannot really separate the luminosity and warmth of the sun communicated by its rays from the sun itself. They are one and the same thing, like water and wetness or fire and heat. And so sun and luminosity and warmth. The luminosity and warmth being, our awareness of others within this tidal wave of compassion. And the ego is exactly the opposite. The ego is what is afraid of others. The ego is what is afraid of emptiness. The ego is afraid of openness. The ego is exactly the opposite way of living in the world. So it's up to each one of us. I mean, it's not enough just to know the view. We have to meditate so that we can experience it. We can't talk about ice cream without having tasted it over and over again until we habituate ourselves to it. And it's up to each one of us to evaluate our own self and what kind of view we have. Is our view of the openness, which allows for the presence of others, which allows for them to flourish within our space, that allows for love in between as that space of communication between us? Or is it something, or when we look inside, is our view this tight, grasping, difficult space where we're afraid of others and they are prickly to us and we're prickly to them? We have to examine this quality of that space and awareness. Is there openness? Is there tolerance? Is there freedom that we give to ourselves and to others? Or is it the opposite? And, we talk about liberation all the time. We talk about freedom and we talk about liberation. And this is what Rinpoche says. We speak of liberation. We speak of wanting the mind to attain liberation. What is this bondage from? The question is, what do we want to be free from? We want to be liberated precisely from the bonds of thinking. These constructs that I was referring to earlier is this summation of the ego, the multi-layered cake or a high-rise building made of constructs. Liberated from the bonds of thinking, the chains of concepts, and all those ideas about how it should be. Those are the very things that bind the mind. Here you have something and you wrap it up tighter and tighter with theories and opinions and analytical discoveries about how it should be. So, and I was just watching a teaching of Garchen Rinpoche recently, and she said, well, what is the nature of the mind? You know? And she answered it in such a beautiful and profound way, and she said, it's actually utter simplicity. That's what open dimension, that's what emptiness means. Simplicity. It's when our body is still, and when our speech is silent, and when our mind is at rest. When the mind is not grasping to ideas and labels and connotations and judgments and afflictions. It's exactly the opposite. It's when we're dissolving all that and we're allowing the water, the ocean, to stand still again, so that we can experience on the most profound level the quality of this wetness. Taming the mind means removing the rigidity, removing the obscurations of concepts and afflictions, and allow perceptions to arise within the open space of our mind's nature. The greater degree of self-cherishing, of self-grasping, the greater degree is of pain that we experience, of suffering. Because the world becomes like shards of glass that we step on all the time with our feet, that we cut against with our skin, that we chew, that we see. Everything cuts us because if we are rigid, and by the way, fear is also a form of anger, a form of the affliction upon which most of our concepts are built, our judgments are built. If we allow ourselves to experience within the open dimension, we can embrace, and we can embrace the ultimate truth. We don't have to be afraid of the openness, of the emptiness, of the impermanence, of the interdependence. And so we don't have to always feel like we're surrounded and rolling in glass day and night. Because the ego is this structure where we experience every waking moment of our existence rolling in glass. Because the ego is never wrong, it's never open, it's never empty of judgment, it's never empty of suffering. Because that's what an ego is. So, purifying self-grasping and allowing bodhicitta to surface as a basis of our life and actions is to allow space, is to allow for happiness. Because happiness is the energy of compassion and openness. And when these two factors emerge, we can experience happiness as opposed to experience ego and suffering. You should really start to analyze and see how ego and suffering are the one bundle, happiness and openness, understanding impermanence and emptiness is the other. Emptiness does not mean that we don't allow perceptual experiences to arise. On the contrary, what that means is that we allow perceptual experiences to arise within openness, and we allowing them to arise, and we are allowing ourselves to see, to simply experience, as opposed to right away judge, suffocate, and experience pain, because we can't hope for anything else but experience of pain if we're experiencing everything through a very fragile ego, because our ego is like razor blades on everything. And so, what is the antidote to ego, to self-cherishing? And the antidote is the ultimate truth, and surrender and experience of that ultimate truth. Again, it's like moving away from the hurricane on the surface, or the bubbles, or the ice, and experiencing again the nature of the wetness of the water, of our nature within the open dimension. How do we do that? It is said that the greatest path to doing that is taking refuge is refuge is like being able to melt the piece of ice into the ocean. What do we take refuge in? We know there's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Buddha, when we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the qualities of enlightened nature of our own mind. We don't take refuge in a person or a doctrine. We take refuge in the Buddha mind, in our own nature, in our own enlightened qualities of this luminosity and compassion in union, openness and compassion, emptiness and compassion in union. That's what it means taking refuge in the Buddha. We take refuge in our own Buddha nature. We take refuge in our basis of our mind. What does it mean when we take refuge in the Dharma? It means we take refuge in the treasure that holds the view and the teaching regarding the absolute truth, regarding the nature of our mind and phenomena. That's what it means we take refuge in the Dharma. What does it mean that we take refuge in the Sangha, the assembly of bodhisattvas, those who have come before us? That means that we can follow in their footsteps on the path they've carved out. They preceded us, and they have discovered and laid bare the Buddha nature for us, and they are showing to us how to live a compassionate life in this world. That we can take their roadmap and be on that road, as opposed to like wander in the forest, scared shitless, running amok, not knowing what to do, feeling like the nature is against us and we're against everything else. That's what it means we take refuge in the Sangha. We take the refuge in the roadmap and in those who preceded us. And like Michael always says, when we go for refuge, or when we go to get, brain surgery, if we have, God forbid, need of a brain surgeon, who do we go to? To a guy who's been, is a lineage holder, who has finished, fantastic universities and studied with the best, or you go to some guy who had a biology class in 3rd grade for 1 semester. So that's how we know who to follow and where to go, where to seek, our training and our teaching. We go to the best so that one day we too can be bodhisattvas or the brain surgeon. So one day we too can perform compassionate activities and live a compassionate life without fear and without, darkness. And I just want to conclude with, it is said, always specified in Buddhist teaching, that the mother of all Buddhas is prajna. Prajna means wisdom. And, that is what it means to embrace the teaching, is to really seek the truth, learning the view, hearing about the view, but then really taking it into experience, not leaving it as this conceptual thing that the ego will wield like another club over other beings' heads, where we say, oh, I am so smart, I'm now a Buddhist, I know everything, I know better, I know how to, but that we take prajna as our path and as our refuge, and that we too live compassionate lives based on wisdom. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. You can put questions in the Q&A function. I wanted to read something. This is a quote from Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, who brought Buddhism to Tibet. Within the sky-like empty mind, habitual tendencies and disturbing emotions are just like clouds and mist. When they appear within the expanse of the empty mind. When they remain within the expanse of the empty mind. And when they dissolve in that same expanse of empty mind. Which is very much what I think we're talking about. You know, and remember, it's really about applying these teachings. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing, saying, learning through Buddhism what you think is, having new criteria on what's right or wrong or things. It's really about starting to, you're using these techniques in meditation to be able to see your MO, your modus operandi, how your mind works, how your judgments formed, what is really the motivating factors behind your reaction and your behavior and your thoughts. We're slowing things down, it's you always have to remember these teachings are not just about reading a book and agreeing or not or it making sense or not. It's really about, without application there's nothing. Without application, it's like going in one ear and out the other. Habitual tendencies and your karma is so strong and been developed over countless eons that the only way to get any, foothold, any leverage over them is really vigilance, and constant diligence and application of what we're learning in our not day-to-day life, moment-to-moment life. And it's really about questioning everything we've thought and done in the past, how we've acted, how we've responded. It's actually a huge demand and very hard. But like anything of great value, it takes a lot of work. Um, it's not just about hearing a teaching saying that makes a lot of sense and that makes me feel good that I agree with that. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's not even scratching the surface. And I'm not assuming or saying that that's what I'm saying, that to myself as well, you know, to not get lulled into this sense that I agree with, and I kind of have a sense of what this is about and it makes sense to me. That alone is not, might even be worse than nothing. Um, so with that, we'll take some.
I also just want to say, please always remember your Buddha nature is always there. You have everything that you ever need. You have the perfection at your fingertips. It's much simpler than we think that it is. And our awareness is very deeply connected to our breath. So reconnect with your nature, instead of being competitive and trying to be better than the next guy. Reconnect with your nature, with wisdom. It is intrinsic.
Can you explain ultimate truth?
Ultimate truth is just the state of how things are, meaning, usually it's discussed how the self is and the nature of phenomena. So both are empty in their nature. In other words, there is a relative level of where we construct things that we lay on top of perception. This is good, this is like this is like that. But the basis of all things, which is space and awareness, is an open dimension. It isn't anything per se.
So what explain kind of in a nutshell ultimate truth and relative truth and how they differ.
Ultimate truth is, the empty nature, the empty state of all things, which is, as I said, I prefer open dimension. That, as I just read the quote from Garchen Rinpoche, in Buddhism is distinguished because awareness is the basis of everything. It's not distinguished, but it's spoken of in the two-dimensionality. Openness and awareness being the energy of compassion. That element of the seeing element of awareness that is sometimes called luminosity is also the nature of the energy of compassion, because the awareness is something that is energetic. It's something that happens. It's something that is a process. It's something that goes on. Awareness is always aware. It's not like something that ever stops. It's that energy is the energy of compassion. That is how the masters perceive it. It's the energy of basic goodness that is just our nature. And the ultimate truth is not something that we speak about, it's non conceptual. Ultimate truth is something that is experiential only and exceeds conceptual mind. So we can only talk about it in this kind of like metaphorical way. And everything I just said is a metaphor for experience. But the experience, like eating ice cream, can I replicate and explain what the taste of ice cream is without you tasting it? No. So you have to do that for yourself. It is up to us to experience ultimate truth. It isn't something that anyone can give to you. It isn't something that could just be handed over to us. It is experiential, and it's up to us to meditate and to experience that openness, that vastness, and that compassion.
That was great, thank you. Repulsed by decision of Roe v. Wade, how to meditate healing. I'm not really clear what you mean meditate healing. I mean, if you're talking about yourself, that you're feeling hurt or you're feeling angry, there's also, you can also be engaged and, in activism and education or something, to actually be part of change, protest or whatever that means, to you, how you want to participate in this. That could be part of the healing. As far as using meditation to kind of make sense or make peace with that, do you have something?
Yeah, I mean, the important thing is to understand that no matter what activity we undertake or just the sensing within our presence, it should never be affliction. We must make sure that whatever we feel and we say and do out of that inner space is not based on things like anger and resentfulness. And find other things through meditation, how to engage positively, how to feel positively about something that's very difficult in the world, because we are now surrounded by a lot of ignorance, and we have to deal with it, but it's not by seething and holding afflictive emotions on the inside and spewing them out on the outside. So we start by dissolving our own anger, and how we do meditation on how to dissolve negativities. We do Tonglen. We do the 9 breath purification. We visualize the dark things. We dissolve them at our heart center. We breathe out pure luminosity. That is a method. That is one of the infinite amount of methods. And then find other ways how you can be productive in terms of removing yourself from simply a judgment and an afflictive emotion on the experience of an afflictive emotion on your interior, and moving toward a productive change if that is what you choose.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time in this class, that Buddhism or being a Buddhist is not mean you're just gonna sit on your cushion and ignore everything that's going on in society, or just kind of not oppose, oppression or things that are fundamentally wrong, that you feel are fundamentally wrong as a citizen. There's times when you may want to speak out, or you want to take certain actions to oppose these things, and that's and that the clear, I think, where meditation and the practice of Buddhism comes in, is that you'll be much more effective when you come out of a place that's not, as Victoria said, with the afflictive emotion, that's coming out of a certain clarity and trying to see, what the, and listen, it's normal for these things to make you angry. It's not wrong to feel these feelings. It's saying it's okay. We're not saying that you're wrong to feel anger at some kind of judgment that's fundamentally wrong, or you feel that's okay. It's figuring out what's the most effective path, and when you're in the grips of such strong emotion, it's hard to do that.
And I just wanted to add that Buddha, who was a prince 2,500 years ago, who lived in a very restricted and class coded society, he was kind of the ultimate revolutionary. Buddha brought women and untouchables into his circle of disciples. And at that time, it sent waves of reactions through his society, because he undermined all the norms with doing that, because obviously Buddhism is about equanimity, you know. If we can be equanimous with insects and snakes and everything else, needless to say, women and untouchables or whoever, uh, that kind of went beyond saying. So Buddha was a very revolutionary being, based on the seed of enlightenment, on the seed of compassion, on the seed of prajna, wisdom, and compassion. He acted exactly in accordance with prajna, with wisdom, and compassion. And that's what we have to emulate. We have to do the same thing, but we have to find ways of doing it, without either living in hatred or causing hatred. So those are the things we have to do as practitioners.
Managing ego is my biggest challenge. Professionally, working hard and doing great work, but doing so without the expectation of reward or validation that my ego really wants, is a constant struggle. Any tips on how to deal with this other than just staying aware and constantly examining my motivations? Well, staying aware and constantly examining your motivations is a big step. So, I wouldn't be so flip about that, other than that. I mean, if you're really staying aware and constantly examining your motivations, you're going to be able to kind of put this in perspective. Also, it's not, let's get beyond, the judgment, like expectation of reward or validation that your ego wants. It's okay that that's there. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you're, wrong, or it's just like we want to go beyond that. We because there's a certain aggression in those things. Very often in our motivation to succeed and be the best, and rise above this one, and comparing and despairing against this one's better, this one's worse. There's a certain aggression in those things, in the speed of those things, and in the energy of those things. So we want to first recognize that, and then make and acknowledge that that's okay, that's there, okay, but now what? I know that that's there. I still want to do really good work. I believe in my work. I want a certain I want to keep getting better because I believe in it and it means something to me, and I want the people that I work with to be inspired by that and be inspired themselves, and for them to good work. It's not about for them to do good work. It's not just about me rising above that.
And I just wanted to add that very often when we live in this tension of comparing ourselves to others, uh, upon very, very little bit of examination, we will find that those parameters were inherited by us from a very, very long time ago, either from our parents or societal norms or from school and our peers, or the entire complex of it all. And at some point, we have to give ourselves permission to not carry that any longer. We want to be the best, but we can do so without the comparison, without feeling like there's always tension with others, without needing to be better than him or be better than her, just to be better from within ourselves. I am better than I was yesterday. I did better than I did last night. Uh, that is something that we have to give ourselves permission not to carry the burden of this sharp comparison and always struggling against others. We can simply drop that. You just have to say to yourself at some point, I'm okay with this. I'm okay how I am. I want to be better than I was last night. I want to be better than I was last year. I want to be better than I was this morning. We need to do that as practitioners. We're always correcting ourselves. We always trying to have more awareness, more spaciousness, more liberty from all these little tiny constructs that are constantly the rigidity of the ego that's always cutting us and our environment. So give yourself the permission not to carry that, and examine, just see where, see the causal nature of where the origin story of this comparison, of this fierce competitiveness, where that came from, and then, with or without acknowledging or seeing it exactly where it came from, give yourself permission not to carry it any longer and be okay with yourself.
What do you think about abortion law in USA? Greetings from Italy. I mean, what I think is not necessarily relevant, you know. I think in the U.S. you have separation of church and state, which is very important, and people should not be making laws based on, in my opinion, their own religious beliefs. That should dictate. Not everybody believes in God. Not everybody's a Christian. Not everybody's Catholic, and people have different ways of seeing the world. You know, I mean, we're talking about freedoms, and people passing laws. Restricting the freedom of other, of what a woman can do with her, her body. That's, my opinion. But my opinion's kind of, I think, irrelevant. Do you want to speak about it from a Buddhist perspective, or speaking as a woman too?
I mean, as a Buddhist, I don't want to make judgments on others. I mean, if a woman, a girl was raped, or a woman finds out, by taking a genetic test that her baby is going to be severely impaired, women I believe, should be able to make decisions for themselves on individual kinds of basis, and I don't think anyone should have to dictate. Just as, for example, Michael and I don't eat meat, fish. We don't eat living beings. It's not about meat or fish. We don't eat living beings for many, many years. But I, at the same time, don't feel that that is a judgment on anyone, or that I should pass it. People have to find their way to these things on their own. And sometimes, the circumstances for abortion are not just like happy sex from last night and I'm running into an abortion. A lot of times it's based on very, very difficult decisions, and I think we shouldn't judge others who are faced with those kinds of decisions. And we should certainly not impose our faith on others. And that's my 5 cents.
Yeah, and in terms of Buddhism, I spoke about this not long ago. Buddhism is not necessarily interested in creating social structures. It's much more of an individual path. There's not even an overarching, we're in Tibetan tradition, there's not this overarching structure where, even like the Dalai Lama is very respected and revered, but it's not like he's the Pope and he's making decisions for every single Tibetan Buddhist. You're much more connected to your own individual teacher and that teacher, his or her lineage. And there's many different lineages, even within Tibetan Buddhism. Buddhism is much more about an individual path and your own motivations. Much of the decisions and much of where right and wrong comes in Buddhism is about motivation, not just black and white. This is right, this is wrong. It's about, every situation being unique and applying that. So it's not just black and white, this is wrong, you're wrong, I'm right. It's much more about your own individual path, examining your own motivation. So you're cultivating certain, positive karma and virtuous actions as opposed to, non-virtue. Okay. At the end of class, we dedicate the merit, whatever merit that was created from this class, to the benefit of all beings. I'm going to read something. This is from Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche. Chagdud Tulku, Tulku Rinpoche. Accumulating and dedicating merit out of self-interest will only produce temporary benefit. There was once a practitioner with a strong desire to sit on a throne like the High Lamas, so he accumulated a lot of merit, offering butter lamps and food and practicing generosity. He didn't want to benefit anyone, he merely wanted prestige and recognition. His self-centered motivation and dedication led to a rebirth as a rabbit that one day hopped into a monastery right up onto a throne. Because he had accumulated so much merit, his wish had a certain power, but not in the way he had intended. Moreover, all that merit was exhausted in that single moment. That's a lesson in cause and effect, in karma. And we dedicate the merit so it's of a lasting benefit, and it's for the benefit. It becomes like we talk about, you're taking a drop of water and putting it into the ocean. That little drop becomes the ocean as well. Whatever merit we're creating in this little corner of the world that we're doing this class, and however many people are here together sitting and making aspirations and practicing, that generates a certain degree of merit. It's cultivating a certain positive energy, positive karma. We're dedicating, making the wish and aspiration that whatever merit we're creating here, whatever positive karma, let it be not just for us, not for us to have a better life, not for us to just have a better birth, but for all beings. That's really, really important. With that in mind, let's dedicate the merit from today's class. By this merit may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Thank you all. Thank you, Nick Solidio, our producer, for his kindness and generosity. We'll see you next week.